He promised them an empire. He promised them glory. But now, the very men who built Vladimir Putin's Russia are watching their fortunes burn. And their loyalty is turning to ash. This is the unmaking of a pact. The whispers in Moscow's most exclusive clubs and behind the high walls of dachas outside the capital speak of a rupture. For many years, the world saw Vladimir Putin's Russia as an unbreakable wall of fear and allegiance. However, fortresses do not always blow up when they are put under enough stress. They crumble occasionally. The protracted conflict in Ukraine and the disastrous economic effects of international isolation have started to break the fundamental bonds that connect the nation's most prominent oligarchs to the Kremlin, according to reports and analysis from top research centers. This is neither the frustrated comments of military bloggers nor the loud protests of political rivals. The owners of money and power, who have long been the economic cornerstones of Putin's regime and control key industries, are quietly and dangerously disillusioned. Their support was transactional rather than ideological, and as the war destroys the very foundations of that transaction, their wealth, their global status, and their sense of security, the iron fist that has ruled Russia for nearly a quarter century is beginning to loosen. The system is not collapsing yet, but it is rotting from within, and the scent of decay is becoming impossible for its architects to ignore. According to the Nest Center's 2024 Political Transformation Index, the political system in which these oligarchs operate has grown increasingly personalized, centralized, and dependent on loyalty over competence. The president writ large, an extended framework of presidential authority that includes not only the president, but also the administration, the Security Council, and other councils under his direct control, is what observers refer to as the consolidation of power. Institutions in this system no longer operate autonomously, only responding to orders from this consolidated presidential authority. This hyper-personalization of power used to be advantageous to the oligarchs. One man could make a deal, and his word was final. However, it is now a liability. The regime is actively preparing for a managed generational transition, systematically promoting younger officials from Putin's inner circle, adjutants and the so-called children of the elite, into key positions in state institutions, often despite a lack of substantial management experience. The entrenched oligarchic class, whose positions and fortunes were linked to the old guard and its well-established regulations, is being unsettled by this rejuvenation, which is intended to secure the regime's future. These personnel changes in 2024 to 2025 signal the beginning of a regime change, with Putin retaining control and a new generation of loyalists handling day-to-day operations. This creates a new level of uncertainty for business elites used to working with a familiar group of powerful individuals. In front of their eyes, the same structure that ensured their riches is changing, and their position in this new arrangement is far from certain. The conflict has descended into a bloody impasse on the battlefield. By October 2025, Russian forces have failed to achieve significant territorial gains despite catastrophic casualties, with total losses nearing 1 million killed, wounded, missing, or captured. This makes Ukraine the second deadliest conflict for Russia in a century, surpassed only by World War II, with nearly 3,000 tanks lost, more than Russia's total pre-war active duty inventory. The material cost has been equally astounding. However, the oligarchs' business balance sheets, rather than the Donbass trenches, are the source of their greatest suffering. Ukraine's assault against Russia's economic juggernaut, its ability to refine oil, has been creative and methodical. Refineries that account for over 38% of Russia's entire oil processing capacity have been wrecked or rendered inoperable by Ukraine in a devastating series of drone attacks throughout 2025. There have been dire and rapid repercussions. Fuel shortages, long lines, and price spikes occurred in more than 20 regions throughout Russia as a result of the collapse in domestic gasoline output, which resulted in a supply shortfall equal to roughly 20% of consumption. In a stunning reversal for a once energy-independent nation, the Russian government has been forced to extend a ban on gasoline exports, eliminate import duties on fuel, and is now preparing to import gasoline from allies like Belarus and even from competitors like China and South Korea. For the oligarchs who built their empires on the extraction and sale of natural resources, this is a direct assault on their most fundamental source of wealth. The physical destruction of refining assets, combined with a complete cutoff from Western technology needed to repair them, means their primary revenue streams are literally going up in smoke, with reconstruction estimated to cost billions and take years under current conditions. This economic catastrophe has blown apart the unspoken Faustian bargain that has governed relations between the Kremlin and the oligarchic class since Vladimir Putin came to power. The terms of this deal were simple and ruthless. The state promised the oligarchs personal security, financial protection, and integration into the global economy in return for their unwavering political allegiance and commitment to abstain from high politics. Through this agreement, Putin was able to overthrow the powerful oligarchs of the 1990s and install a new generation of state-aligned businessmen, frequently from his own KGB circle, such as Gennady Timchenko and the Rotenberg brothers. It worked for years. The oligarchs amassed unthinkable wealth, and Putin solidified his total power with little opposition from the business elite. However, this historic agreement is now void due to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin is unable to fulfill its fundamental commitments. Security has evaporated, with drone attacks reaching deep into Russian territory, including Moscow, and events like the brief rebellion of the late Yevgeny Prigozhin showing the regime's vulnerability. A war economy, skyrocketing inflation, and the persistent threat of mobilization have taken the place of stability, which was Putin's main selling point following the instability of the 1990s. Above all, wealth is disappearing. An estimated $300 billion in central bank assets and numerous private assets of foreign oligarchs have been blocked due to sanctions. Sanctions, logistical difficulties, and the state's constant insistence on funding the war machine have decimated their enterprises in Russia. The fundamental promise of the agreement, prosperity in return for allegiance, has been violated. In light of this fact, the elite's dissatisfaction is no longer confined to personal complaints. Rather, it is taking the form of a subdued but effective resistance that is hindering the operation of the regime. A passive withdrawal of collaboration is taking place. Even though an outright coup is still unlikely, analysts note a phenomenon of silent sabotage, where oligarchs delay investments mandated for the war effort, lower production targets, and create bureaucratic obstacles to resist the Kremlin's escalating demands on their resources. This passive resistance slows the wheels of the war economy, making it harder for the Kremlin to sustain its military campaign. Furthermore, the sense of pessimism and anxiety among the elite inevitably seeps down into the broader society and the military, undermining the morale and national unity that the Kremlin desperately tries to project. The regime's response to this descent has been characteristically heavy-handed. Reports indicate a rise in prosecutions and property seizures, a tactic that redistributes assets to a second tier of the elite whose loyalty is more personally tied to Putin. The FSB's reported traitor hunts now target not only external opponents, but also elites suspected of silent resistance within the country. However, this increased pressure is a double-edged sword. It may enforce short-term compliance, but it also fuels internal paranoia and conflict, causing the regime to devour its own. Collective decision-making is paralyzed, and survivalist instincts take precedence over rational policy in a setting where everyone fears being the next victim. A clear example of a system in logistical and intellectual decline is the intention to sell crude oil to China at a discount, only to import back refined gasoline at a premium. This weakens the regime's ability to act cohesively and results in ineffective and frequently ridiculous policies. The oligarchs' pragmatic desire for economic survival and a return to global normalcy contrasts with Putin's concern with his historical legacy and regime survival, which ultimately represents the unavoidable conflict of two irreconcilable interests. For Putin, the war in Ukraine is not a policy that can be abandoned. It is the defining project of his presidency. A retreat or compromise would shatter his carefully cultivated image as a strongman and could directly threaten his grip on power. Therefore, he appears determined to continue the conflict at any cost, even if that means presiding over the long-term economic ruin of Russia itself. His is a calculus of power, not prosperity. For the oligarchs, the calculus is inverted. The endless war is an existential threat to their fortunes and their future. They must put a stop to the war and figure out how to reintegrate Russia into the world economy if they hope to survive. Loyalty, which was always a commodity, has now completely diminished due to this basic conflict of interest. The Faustian deal is no longer valid. The walls of the Kremlin are not yet collapsing, but the gaps are widening, and the voices of the powerful men inside are becoming more audible, creating a chorus of dissatisfaction that could yet influence how this battle turns out. Putin's system, which was created to stifle opposition, is currently under attack from the very force that created it: the unrelenting quest for riches and power.